The story of Frank Sinatra begins not under the bright lights of a stage, but in the soft, honey-colored glow of a gas lamp on a narrow street in Hoboken, New Jersey. It is December of 1915, and the air holds the crisp, salty bite of the Hudson River. The tenement buildings stand shoulder to shoulder, their brick facades darkened by decades of winter soot, yet each window spills a little rectangle of amber warmth onto the pavement. This is a neighborhood of Italian immigrants, where the scent of simmering tomato sauce drifts from fire escapes and the sound of a distant mandolin sometimes floats through an open door. In the quiet of the evening, you can almost hear the gentle lapping of water against the nearby piers, the rhythmic creak of a docked ferry, the muffled footsteps of a policeman on his beat. It is a world of ordinary rituals, of mothers calling children home and shopkeepers pulling down their shutters, the iron rattling softly in the night air. Inside one of these modest apartments at 415 Monroe Street, a child named Francis Albert Sinatra enters the world. He is a difficult birth, a 13.5-pound baby delivered with the help of forceps that leave a lasting scar along his left cheek and ear, a mark his mother would later say gave him character. The room is small but tidy, with lace curtains diffusing the street lamp light and a crucifix on the wall above the bed. Dolly Sinatra, his mother, is a woman of fierce energy and determination, a midwife and political activist who talks with her hands and fills the room with plans. His father, Marty, is a quiet, sturdy man, a boxer turned fireman for the Hoboken Fire Department, whose calm presence balances Dolly's intensity. In these early days, the infant Frank rests in a wooden cradle by the window, lulled by the distant foghorns that echo across the river, their low notes seeming to announce a voice that would one day become the most recognizable in the world. As young Frank grows, the streets of Hoboken become his first audience and his first classroom. The neighborhood hums with a particular kind of music, the pushcart peddlers calling out their wares in Sicilian dialect, the clatter of milk bottles in the morning, the organ grinders monkey dancing on the corner. Little Frank, dressed in hand-me-down knickers and a flat cap, walks with his mother to St. Francis Church, where the stained glass casts jewel-toned light across the wooden pews and the incense curls in slow, sacred spirals. He listens to the choir, his dark eyes wide, absorbing the resonance of the Latin hymns. He does not yet know that his own voice will one day fill spaces far vaster than this neighborhood parish, but perhaps he senses a stirring in his chest, a vibration that matches the depth of the organ pipes. After school, while other boys play stickball in the cobblestone alleyways, Frank often lingers by the waterfront. He stands at the edge of a pier, watching the sun set behind the Manhattan skyline, the sky turning from pale blue to lavender to a deep, velvety indigo. The ferry boats crisscross the river, their lights beginning to twinkle, and the water reflects the fading colors in broken pieces. It is a solitary moment, a boy alone with the vastness of the harbor, learning to appreciate silence before he ever learns to command a roar. These quiet interludes shape him. They teach him to observe, to absorb the mood of a landscape, to feel the rhythm of the world without words. It is the sort of sensitivity that will later allow him to interpret a lyric with such profound emotional precision. The Sinatra household is modest, but filled with the warmth of hospitality. On Sunday afternoons, the aroma of Dolly's gravy, never called sauce, fills the entire building. There is a Victrola in the corner of the parlor, a beautiful mahogany cabinet with a crank on the side and a stack of shellac records. Family and neighbors gather around as music fills the room: Caruso, Russ Columbo, Bing Crosby. Frank sits cross-legged on the floor, his head tilted, absorbing every note. The sound is scratchy yet profoundly moving, a ghostly tenor floating just above the hiss of the needle. It is during these afternoon gatherings that the young Frank first begins to hum along, his voice unusually steady for a child, his tone already carrying a hint of the velvet darkness that will one day mesmerize millions. The radio becomes Frank's secret companion in the late hours of the night. In the tiny bedroom he shares with a cousin, the two boys whisper and adjust the dial, finding stations from faraway cities, Chicago, St. Louis, sometimes even a faint signal from New Orleans. The music drifts through the darkness like a lullaby, the glow of the radio tubes casting a soft orange light on the ceiling. He listens to the big bands, to the crooners who sing of moonlight and roses, and he imagines himself standing in front of an orchestra, not in a burst of noise and applause, but in that perfect, suspended moment just before the first note is played. In those nights, the bedroom becomes a cathedral of dreams, the static between stations a kind of ocean across which his future is already calling. As he enters his teenage years, Frank begins to carry a small notebook in his back pocket. He scribbles lyrics he overhears on the street, phrases from conversations, the names of chords a local music teacher shows him on an old upright piano. He practices smiling in the mirror, but not with arrogance. Rather, he studies the way his expression can convey a quiet tenderness, a yearning. He takes any job he can delivering newspapers, unloading crates at the docks, but his mind always drifts back to melody. On rainy afternoons, he sits on the fire escape, the drops pattering on the iron steps, and he sings softly to himself, his voice barely above a whisper, blending with the sound of the storm. None of the neighbors hear him. It is a private concert for the rain and the pigeons. Gradually, the boy from Monroe Street prepares himself, not with fanfare, but with countless invisible hours of devotion, for the gentle and world-changing career that lies just beyond the lamplight. Before the screaming crowds and the headlines, there was a moment of profound stillness backstage at the Paramount Theater in New York City. It is late December 1942, and the building stands on Broadway like a palace of dreams, its magnificent Art Deco marquee stretching upward into the cold winter sky. Outside, the streets are dusted with a thin layer of snow that sparkles under the street lamps. Inside, the grand foyer is silent now, an hour before the doors open. The plush red velvet seats are empty row upon row, waiting. The crystal chandeliers hang like frozen fountains, their light dimmed to a gentle amber. In the wings, Frank Sinatra, just 27 years old, stands alone, his shadow long against the backstage wall. He is not the confident icon the world will soon know. He is a slender young man in a carefully pressed tuxedo, his bow tie perfectly straight, his hands resting quietly at his sides, listening to the soft hum of the heating system and the occasional creak of the old building settling around him. This is Frank's first solo headline appearance, having recently left the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra. The break had been bittersweet, a release from a successful but restrictive arrangement. He had spent months traveling across the country, standing in front of big bands, his voice blending with the brass and reeds. Now he stands alone, with only the microphone and his own shadow for company. He looks out at the vast, empty auditorium. The walls are decorated with elaborate gilded moldings and murals of mythological scenes. A single-work lamp on the stage floor casts a pool of light on the polished wood. In this quiet, he rehearses not the songs, which he knows by heart, but the breathing between the phrases, the way a note can be held just a fraction longer to make the air itself seem to pause. He whispers the words to All or Nothing at All, the lyrics barely escaping his lips, just a murmur to test the acoustics of the silent hall. He walks slowly to the edge of the stage and looks into the orchestra pit, reading the names of the musicians on the music stands. The instruments are already set, a cello resting on its side, a trumpet gleaming in the low light, the sheet music waiting with its tidy black notes. The velvet curtain is half lowered, its heavy fabric absorbing the echo of his footsteps. He thinks of Hoboken, of the fire escape and the rain. It all seems very far away now. He thinks of his wife Nancy at home, their baby daughter sleeping in a quiet house. The contrast between that domestic tranquility and the storm of attention that is about to break is something he cannot yet fully grasp. For now, there is only this suspended moment, a kind of peaceful prayer before the performance. He reaches out and touches the microphone stand. It is cool and solid, an anchor. Suddenly, faintly, he hears the sound of the first ticket holders gathering outside the lobby doors. It is a low musical murmur, the shuffling of feet on the marble floor, the polite voice of the usher. Frank walks back to his modest dressing room, a small space with a mirror bordered by bare light bulbs. He sits down slowly in a wicker chair, the cushion worn soft by many performers before him. On the makeup counter, there is a cup of honey lemon tea, the steam rising in a thin, curling wisp. He takes a sip, feeling the warmth travel down his throat. The room smells of old velvet, powder, and a faint trace of cigar smoke from the previous evening's performer. He does not race with nerves. He is calm, almost meditative. He understands that a voice like his, low, resonant, and capable of extraordinary tenderness, requires relaxation, a body at ease. Outside, the buzz grows slightly louder, but in his room, the sound is muffled to a lull. He looks at his reflection, the scar on his cheek faintly visible. The mirror reflects not just a singer, but a young man who has already learned the value of stillness. The orchestra begins to tune their instruments, the sounds floating through the walls like a gentle, dissonant lullaby. The oboe gives an A, and the strings follow, a beautiful cacophony of preparation. Frank closes his eyes for a moment, and in his mind, he is not at the Paramount but walking along the waterfront, the same boy who once watched the fairy lights from the pier. This connection to his past centers him, reminds him that the voice the world is about to hear was born in quiet, nurtured in solitude. When the moment finally arrives, the house lights dim and the audience settles into a hush. Frank Sinatra steps onto the stage, not with a burst of energy, but with an unhurried, gliding stride. The spotlight finds him gently, a soft circle of white light that seems to wrap around him like a warm cloak. He takes the microphone in his hand, and for a heartbeat, there is absolute stillness. Then the orchestra begins, a soft introduction of strings, and his voice emerges low, liquid, impossibly smooth. It is the voice the girls in the front row have been dreaming of, but tonight it is something more. It is a sound that fills the great hall without overwhelming it, a voice that speaks intimately into the ear of every listener. The Bobby Soxers weep not from hysteria, but from the sheer beauty of the sound. Frank sings "I'll Never Smile Again," and the melody drifts through the theater like a gentle fog, wrapping itself around the chandeliers and the golden moldings, touching every heart in the hushed crowd. In the heart of Hollywood, under the endless blue of a Southern California afternoon, there stands a building unlike any other, the Capitol Records Tower on Vine Street. Completed in 1956, it rises 13 stories into the sky, a cylindrical stack of white concrete and glass that resembles a stack of vinyl records on a turntable. The architect, Welton Beckett, designed it to be both modern and timeless, and on a quiet weekday, the sunlight bounces off its curved exterior in soft, diffused patterns. A slender spire extends from the very top, blinking a gentle red light at night, but now, in the golden hour, it is just a dark pencil line against the pale sky. This is the sanctuary where Frank Sinatra would create some of the most enduring music of his generation. The sidewalks around the building are lined with palm trees that sway almost imperceptibly in the warm breeze. Through the glass entrance, one enters a lobby of polished marble and mid-century elegance, a place where the very air seems to hum with the memory of past melodies. The real magic, however, lies underground. Capitol built Studio A in a subterranean space beneath the tower, a room designed by the legendary acoustician Les Paul and refined over the years into a cathedral of sound. To descend the stairs into the studio is to leave the world above completely. The soundproofing is so thorough that the loudest city noises, the honk of a car, the roar of a plane, evaporate into a profound, velvety silence. The walls are made of thick wood and specially treated panels angled to capture and caress every frequency. Hanging from the ceiling are large acoustic baffles, irregularly shaped, painted a neutral gray. The lighting is soft and indirect, coming from frosted glass fixtures that bathe the room in a perpetual twilight. Here, Frank Sinatra would record in the late afternoon and early evening, when his voice was fully warmed and the day's distractions had faded into memory. On a typical recording day, Frank would arrive in a tailored suit, often a dark gray sharkskin, his hair impeccably trimmed. He would greet the engineers with a quiet nod and a handshake, then make his way to the vocal booth. This was not a glass box, but simply a corner of the vast studio where a solitary microphone stood, a Newman U-47, its chrome finish gleaming softly. A music stand held the sheet music, but Frank rarely needed it. He carried the lyrics within him. The orchestra, 40, sometimes 50 musicians, would already be seated in a gentle crescent around the conductor's podium. Nelson Riddle or Gordon Jenkins would be there, baton in hand, exchanging a few quiet words with Frank. There was no tension, no rush. Everything moved with the deliberate grace of a ritual. Frank would take his place beside the microphone, a cup of hot tea on a small table nearby, maybe a single cigarette burning down in an ashtray. The red recording light would blink on, and the orchestra would begin. The sound in that room was not just heard, it was felt. The tone of each instrument arrived with astonishing clarity. The velvety purr of the cellos, the soft sigh of the French horns, the whisper of the drum brushes on a snare. And then, Frank's voice entered the mix, not as a separate element, but as the instrument that unified them all. He sang with extraordinary restraint, his baritone gliding into the upper registers without strain, his phrasing so natural it sounded like intimate conversation. The engineers in the control room, separated by a thick glass window, leaned forward, mesmerized. They would capture the performance on magnetic tape, the reels spinning slowly, preserving a voice at its absolute peak. During the pauses between takes, a deep quiet settled over Studio A. Musicians would gently place their instruments down, turning pages of their scores. Frank might wander over to the piano, plucking out a few notes of a future melody, or he would stand by the coffee station, staring at the large abstract painting on the wall, lost in thought. The light filtered through the frosted panels, making the room feel suspended in time, a secret chamber of creativity untouched by the frantic industry above. These sessions produced legendary albums. In the wee small hours, songs for swingin' lovers, only the lonely. Each album cover eventually displayed Frank leaning against a wall or standing under a streetlight, looking like a man who carried a quiet sorrow, and the music inside captured exactly that mood, lush, introspective, deeply calming. One song, in particular, evokes the atmosphere of those days, one for my baby, and one more for the road. The take was recorded late at night, perhaps around 11 o'clock. The lights had been dimmed even further, and the studio was thick with blue cigarette smoke that curled and drifted like low fog. The arrangement was sparse, just a piano. Frank sat on a stool beside the pianist, singing the lyrics as if telling a story to an old friend at an empty bar. His voice was a dark, molten river, every syllable weighted with world weariness and grace. The engineers remember that after the final note faded, nobody spoke for a full minute. The silence that followed was the greatest applause. It is this reverence for quiet that made Frank's work at Capitol so transcendent, his understanding that music lives in the spaces between the notes, that a pause can hold more emotion than a crescendo. When the session ended, Frank would emerge from the underground studio into the cool California night. The Capitol Tower stood illuminated, its spire blinking against the stars. His car, a sleek black Cadillac, would be waiting at the curb, the engine idling softly. He would slide into the back seat, the leather cool and smooth, and the driver would pull away smoothly, heading toward the hills of Beverly Hills or the desert roads to Palm Springs. Frank would look back at the tower through the rear window, a stack of white records glowing in the dark, a monument to sound. In those quiet drives, he carried the music with him, the melodies still echoing in his mind, already becoming part of the great American songbook. The Capitol years were not a period of noise and chaos, but of exquisite craftsmanship, of a singer and his arranger painting soundscapes with the same care a master artist applies oil to canvas. Beyond the recording studios and the Hollywood parties, there was a place where Frank Sinatra truly found peace, the desert oasis of Palm Springs. In 1947, he had first fallen in love with the arid landscape, the way the sun cast long, sharp shadows across the sand, and the manner in which the San Jacinto Mountains turned a deep violet at dusk. He commissioned an architect to build a house that would become his primary retreat from the exhaustion of celebrity. The result was Twin Palms, a mid-century modern masterpiece with a piano-shaped swimming pool and floor-to-ceiling glass walls that blurred the line between indoor comfort and the wild desert outside. The home sat on Alejo Road, then a quiet lane lined with date palms and ocotillo, where the only sounds were the occasional hum of a distant car and the call of a coyote at twilight. The property was not grandiose but elegant, every line intentional, a tribute to the architectural ideals of the time. Stepping inside Twin Palms in the early 1950s is to enter a world of clean lines, warm wood, and terrazzo floors that stay cool underfoot even on the hottest day. The living room is dominated by a massive stone fireplace, its hearth large enough to stand inside, and a grand piano that sits facing the view. Through the enormous windows, the swimming pool stretches out, its water a vivid turquoise that mirrors the cloudless desert sky. A gentle breeze moves through the jalousie windows, bringing the scent of sage and creosote. Frank would often wake late in the morning here, after a long night in Las Vegas or the recording studio. He would walk barefoot across the smooth floors, a cup of black coffee in his hand, and stand at the glass, watching the hummingbirds dart among the bougainvillea. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft chime of a wind bell on the patio. By the afternoon, when the desert heat pressed against the walls, Frank would retreat to his den. It was a small, intimate room with built-in bookshelves and original abstract paintings on the walls, artists he admired and collected. A reel-to-reel tape player sat on a low credenza, along with stacks of recording tapes from Capitol, unedited arrangements he wanted to study. He would sit in a leather Eames lounge chair, the brown hide worn soft from use, and listen to playback after playback. The music would fill the room softly, his own voice strangely distant to him, like a ghost visiting for tea. This was not vanity but study. He listened with the ear of a craftsman, noting where a breath needed to be longer or a phrase slightly more legato. The sunlight would slant through the vertical blinds, painting stripes of gold across the floor, and time would seem to slow to a crawl. In the early evenings, when the temperature began to cool, Frank would swim alone in the piano-shaped pool. The water was always heated to a perfect temperature, and the underwater lights tinted the entire pool a luminescent aquamarine. He would float on his back, looking up at the sky, which darkened from periwinkle to indigo, the first stars appearing as faint pinpricks of light. The mountains turned into black silhouettes against the fading color. There were no fans here, no photographers, no bandleaders demanding decisions. Just the water lapping gently against the concrete edge, the distant twinkle of the town's lights below, and the solitary silhouette of a man suspended between sky and water. It was in these moments of floating silence that the tensions of performance would melt out of his shoulders, leaving him weightless and calm. Dinner at Twin Palms was often a quiet affair with a few close friends, actors, comedians, musicians who understood that fame required a sanctuary. The dining table was lit by low candles, their flames reflected in the glassware. The menu was classic Italian, prepared by a private chef or sometimes by Frank himself, who took pride in his spaghetti and meatballs. Afterwards, the group might retire to the living room, where the piano player would softly play Gershwin or Porter, and Frank might hum along from the sofa, his head resting against a cushion, his eyes half closed. The conversation was low and punctuated by gentle laughter. Outside, the desert had grown completely dark, the Milky Way sprawling across the sky like spilled sugar. Through the glass walls, the house seemed to float on an island of light in a sea of darkness. Later in life, Frank would move to a larger estate, also in Palm Springs, known as the Sinatra compound on Wonder Palms Road, but it was Twin Palms that remained the symbol of his first great chapter of joy and heartbreak. It was here he lived during his passionate but turbulent marriage to Ava Gardner, and even after their separation, the house held the echo of her laughter and the scent of her perfume. In the stillness, he would sometimes walk the grounds alone at midnight, the gravel crunching softly under his leather slippers. He would pause by the pool, the underwater lights still on, casting rippling patterns across the patio. The ghost of a love story lingered, not with sorrow but with a tender, resigned affection. The desert air was always forgiving, dry and clean, carrying away the weight of memory as gently as it carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine. In the morning, the cycle began again. The soft awakening, the coffee by the window, the hum of the desert waking up. Palm Springs offered a kind of eternal present, a place where the passing of time was marked not by clocks, but by the shifting angle of sunlight on the mountains. For Frank Sinatra, this desert home was not just a piece of real estate, it was a state of mind, a necessary antidote to the applause. He would return again and again throughout his life, seeking the same quiet light, the same floating peace in the pool, the same restorative solitude that allowed him to continue singing songs of loneliness and love with such convincing authority.